It all started with a silly argument. We were sitting at the bar sipping beer when the conversation turned to urban legends. My friend Jake, an eternal thrill seeker, boasted that he had traveled to all the damn places in the area and had never chickened out. I quipped at the time that most of these stories were made up for tourists and that real fear wasn't born from ghosts but from what people could do to each other. Jake frowned, took out his phone, and showed me a photo, a lopsided hut lost in the thick of the forest. "There are no ghosts here," he whispered. "There's something here other. A college kid disappeared there last winter. They only found a shoe full of blood." I snorted, but something jumped inside. "Prove that you are not a weakling," he continued. "Spend the night there alone. If you survive, the next beer is on me." I agreed. Not because of the beer, of course. I'm just tired of being considered a boring skeptic who's afraid of his own shadow. The next morning, I was already driving along a dirt road, winding through the pines. The GPS lost its signal a long time ago, but I remembered the map. 3 turns to the right, an old clearing, then half a kilometer on foot. The air smelled of tar and rotting leaves, and the silence was so oppressive that you wanted to turn on the radio at full volume. But I turned off the engine. The silence became even thicker. The hut turned out to be smaller than in the photo. The walls are made of black logs, the roof is caved in, the windows are boarded up. The door was hanging on one hinge, creaking in the wind. Inside there is dust, cobwebs, and the smell of mold. There were empty beer cans on the floor, a torn sleeping bag, and a kerosene lamp on the table. I turned it on, and the light danced across the walls, picking out scratches on the wood. Long, deep ones like someone was sharpening knives or claws. I laughed at myself. Claws. Really, dude? I decided to look around. I found a ladder to the attic in the corner. The stairs creaked, but they held up. The attic was empty except for a pile of old newspapers in the corner. He made his way through the dusty headlines. Family missing, hunter found dead, no signs of violence. The dates are 10 years old. I gathered the newspapers into a pile, intending to rummage later, and suddenly noticed a stain on the floor. It was dark and sticky, as if someone had tried to wipe away the blood, but had thrown it away. My heart started pounding faster. "The remains of someone's party," I muttered, but my voice sounded uncertain. I went downstairs and put my bag by the door. A supply of food, a flashlight, and a penknife are standard camping supplies. The sun was setting, and I began to regret my adventure. To distract myself, I picked up one of the newspapers. An article about a missing family, mother, father, 2 children. They went camping and didn't come back. The search teams found only a torn tent. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. In another note, there is an interview with a surviving hunter. The man muttered something about eyes in the dark and whispers from the ground, but the journalist attributed it all to a head injury. I put down the newspapers. The wind howled through the cracks of the walls, and the shadows from a lamp seemed too vivid that I woke up at night to a sound. A metallic screech, as if someone was dragging a chain across the floor. My heart jumped into my throat. Grabbing a flashlight, I lit up the room. Empty. Imagination, I thought, but then the door creaked. Slowly, as if she was being pushed from the outside. I jumped up, pressing my back against the wall. The door swung open, and a figure appeared in the opening. She was tall, thin, and wore a baggy raincoat. His face was hidden by a hood. The stranger stepped inside, holding an axe in his hand. The blade glittered in the moonlight. I froze. The brain screamed, "Run," but his feet seemed rooted to the floor. The stranger stopped and turned his head in my direction. I woke up at night to sound. A metallic screech, as if someone was dragging a chain across the floor. My heart jumped into my throat. Grabbing a flashlight, I lit up the room. Empty. Imagination, I thought, but then the door creaked. Slowly, as if she was being pushed from the outside, I ped up, pressing my back against the wall. The door swung open, and a figure appeared in the opening. She was tall, thin, and wore a baggy raincoat. His face was hidden by a hood. The stranger stepped inside, holding an axe in his hand. The blade glittered in the moonlight. I froze. The brain screamed, "Run," but his feet seemed rooted to the floor. The stranger stopped and turned his head in my direction. Raucous breathing could be heard from under the hood. He raised the axe, and I rushed to the window. The boards flew to the sides with a crash when I punched them with my shoulder. The cold air burned his lungs. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face. There were heavy footsteps and hoarse laughter from behind. My heart was pounding like crazy, and my legs felt weak. I tripped over a root and fell into the mud. He rolled onto his back, groping for the knife in his pocket. The axe sank into the ground a centimeter. My heart was pounding like crazy, and my legs felt weak. I tripped over a root and fell into UD. He rolled onto his back, groping for the knife in his pocket. The axe sank into the ground a centimeter from the head. In the moonlight, I saw his face, burnt skin, his left eye stuck together with eyelids, his mouth stretched into a snarl. "You new guy," he hissed, pulling out the axe. I kicked him in the knee, and he growled, losing his balance. Jumping up, I ran to the hut, stupid, but where else to find shelter? Inside, a table overturned, barricading the door. The axe hit a tree. Splinters flew into my face. I rushed to the attic, pulling out the ladder. His laughter echoed through the room. "Are you playing hide and seek?" "I love games." The footsteps, a table overturned, barricading the door. C hit a tree. Splinters flew into my face. I rushed to the attic, pulling out the ladder. His laughter echoed through the room. "Are you playing hide and seek?" "I love games." The footsteps faded away. Silence. Then the creak of floorboards from below. "He's here." I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the knife. Suddenly, the floor beneath me began to shake. He was chopping down the ceiling. The wood cracked, and the blade poked through the crack. I crawled into a corner, bumping into the newspapers. Among them is a leather-bound notebook. He opened it to a random page. He takes us one at a time. "Don't go down to the basement." "There." The recording stopped. The basement. I didn't see the hatch. The axe tore a hole in the floor. A black-gloved hand grabbed my leg. I stabbed with the knife. The blade sank into my wrist. Scream. The hand let go. There was a groan from below, then a whisper. "You've ruined the game." I went down through the hole in the floor, jumping to the side. He wasn't there. There's a trail of blood on the floor. I followed it to the fireplace. One brick stood out, clean as if it had been moved. He pressed it. A hidden door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase down. The smell of rot hit my nose. The flashlight picked out walls covered with numbers and dates. 1987, 1993, 2001. There's a room downstairs. There are chains on the walls, a bloodstained table, and the floor is littered with bones. And photos. Dozens of photos. Missing tourists, families, children, all the people the newspaper wrote about. There's a magazine with names on the table. Last entry, Eric, 22 years old. I left my shoe. He was shouting too loudly. Footsteps on the stairs. He came down humming footsteps on the stairs. He came down humming a children's song. 1, 2, 3, I'm coming for you. I grabbed a bone, a femoral heavy one, and hid behind the door. He walked in, the axe dragging on the floor. "Where are you, mouse?" he drawled. I hit him. The bone cut into his temple. He collapsed, dropping the axe. I grabbed a weapon, but his hand grabbed my ankle. You won't leave." Blood bubbled on his lips. I hit with an axe. 1, 2, until he quieted down. Upstairs, with trembling hands, I set fire upstairs. With trembling hands, I set fire to the hut. Flames licked the logs. Black smoke spread across the ground. I ran without looking back until the roar of the fire was replaced by the silence of the forest. Rescuers found me this morning. Jake signaled when I didn't come back. The police didn't believe it until they dug up the basement. But there were no bodies, no magazines, just ashes. Now, I wake up at night feeling his fingers on my ankle. And sometimes in the silence I hear a whisper, "You, the new guy." 3 months have passed since then, but I can still smell the burning on my skin, no matter how many times I wash. The police closed the case, calling my 3 months have passed since then, but I can still smell the burning on my skin, no matter how many times I wash. The police closed the case, calling M's story stress-induced hallucinations. Even Jake looked at me like I was crazy when I told him the details for the 100th time. But one morning, everything changed. I found an envelope in the mailbox. No stamp, no address. Inside is a photograph. I'm standing with my back to a burning hut, my face contorted with panic. On the back is the inscription, "Well played." I'm waiting for the continuation. The blood drained from his face. Who did this? Did he survive? Or was someone filming me then watching from the woods? I spent the next few days checking every shadow. I installed cameras around the house, changed the locks. But a week later, there was a knock on the door. On the threshold is a woman in her 40s in a formal suit with a folder in her hands. "Mr. Carter, I'm Detective Morgan. Can we talk about your history with the cabin?" She entered without waiting for an answer. The folder contains photos of the basement that I haven't seen in the official R she entered without waiting for an answer. The folder contains photos of the basement that I haven't seen in the official report. On one is a chain with a combination lock, welded to the wall. On the other, the words are scratched into the stone. He teaches us the rules. We found this after your call, Morgan said. But there is a nuance. The chains are too old, at least 20 years old. Your friend in the raincoat couldn't have acted alone. I was speechless. She put another picture on the table. A group of tourists by the lake, 2005. Among them is a man, and I was speechless. She put another picture on the table. A group of tourists by the lake, 2005. Among them is N.A. black raincoat. His face is hidden by a hood. The same silhouette, the same long fingers clutching the axe. He was part of a band that disappeared here in 2007. Everyone thought they were dead. Until yesterday. She took out a newspaper. A sensation. The survivor of the Blood Lake group has been found alive. Photo. An elderly man with scars on his face, crazy eyes. Caption. Arnold Grace claims that he was kept in a pit with lessons for 15 years. Grace is in the hospital under goo. Grace is in the hospital under guard, Morgan continued. But he keeps saying that the teacher is still at large, and that he has students. She looked at my trembling hand. The one who attacked you might have been one of them, and he clearly wants to finish the game. I woke up at night to the sound of metal grinding, just like back in the cabin. The cameras in the kitchen showed movement, a black figure swarming around the back door. I grabbed a baseball bat, but by the time I got down, there was no one in the yard. A bloody axe lay on the steps. There is a note. He jerked the steering wheel sharply. The car skidded on the wet asphalt. The shadow in the back seat darted to the side, and I heard a muffled groan. A face flashed in the mirror, a young guy, about 20 years old, in a black hoodie. It's not a cape, but it looks like it. He clutched at the headrest, trying to hold on. I yelled, cutting off the transmission. The engine roared, the wheels howled, but he was already jumping out of the car, tumbling down the curb. I jumped out, grabbing a tire iron from under the passenger seat. The guy was lying on his back, gasping for air. Blood was oozing out of the torn sleeve. I pressed my foot against his chest. He coughed, spat out a tooth. He said, "You ruined everything." He croaked. His face twisted into a grimace, as if in pain. Who? I pressed harder, but he was already trembling, and his eyes were rolling back in his head. Foam started coming out of his mouth. I jumped back as if I'd been burned. Poisoning. A pill in your mouth. The smell of corpses hit my nose even before I dialed Detective Morgan. "He's dead," I said when she picked up the phone. "Where are you?" Her voice became harsh. I described a place. "Don't touch the body. I'm on my way." While I was waiting, I searched his pockets. A wallet with a driver's license in the name of Lucas Boyd. In his pocket is a folded map of the reserve with a red cross marking the lake. And the photo. I'm standing at my house, looking out the window. The date on the back is yesterday. Morgan arrived with a group. "Boyd," she muttered, looking at the driver's license. "He was listed as missing 6 months ago. My parents thought he ran off with a girl." She put on her gloves and held up the card. "The cross here is an old logging camp. It was demolished in the 90s, but..." She turned the page over. On the reverse side, there's a child's drawing, a man with an axe and the inscription "Teacher." "You need to disappear," she said when the technicians took the body away. "They know where I live." I showed her the photo. She pursed her lips. "I have a safe house. A deserted area, no neighbors. But first we need to get to the warehouse. If Grace kept something there, it could connect Boyd to the teacher." The warehouse turned out to be a rusty hangar on the outskirts of the industrial zone. There are mountains of moldy boxes inside. We searched for 2 hours until I came across a metal box under a pile of rags. There are videotapes inside. One has an inscription on it, Lesson 12. Morgan inserted the tape into the old TV. The screen turned to snow. Then an image appeared, a room with cement walls. The masked man held a knife to the girl's throat. "The first lesson," said a distorted voice. "Fear should be slow. Cut it here." The blade slid across her arm. The girl screamed. The camera shook as if the cameraman was laughing. "Grace," Morgan whispered. It's his voice. But who's behind the scenes? A shadow flickered on the wall behind him, a tall man in an apron holding an axe. "Teacher." Suddenly, the lights in the hangar went out. I heard the door creak. Morgan screamed, but it was too late. A deafening blow knocked me off my feet. The last thing I saw was her body slumped on the concrete, and someone's boots walking towards the box of cassettes. I woke up from the freezing cold. My head was buzzing like a nail had been driven into it. He tried to move, but his hands were tied behind his back with wire, biting into his wrists. The smell of engine oil and rust hit my nose. The hangar. But now I was lying in a corner, and a single light bulb was on above my head, blinking like a dying pulse. Morgan was wheezing next to him. Her face was pale, and there was a dark bruise on her temple. "Breathe deeply," she whispered, without opening her eyes. "They'll be back soon." I yanked the wire, but the pain made me stop. Those who watched the tapes. Students. Footsteps outside the door. I froze. 2 people entered the hangar, a man in a greasy jacket and a woman with red hair. She has a video camera in her hands. We're awake. She smiled like a streamer before the broadcast. Viewers love realism. "Let's start with you, hero." The man pulled out a knife. The blade flashed under the lamp. Morgan lunged forward, kneed him in the groin. He collapsed with a groan. The woman screamed, dropping the camera. I kicked her in the knee, and she fell, hitting her head on a crate. Quickly, Morgan handed me a screwdriver, which she grabbed from a man's pocket. "Cut the wire." I worked with the blade while she searched the woman. "Oh shit," she picked up the phone. "They have a whole network here. Live broadcast." Messages flashed on the screen. "Where's the blood? Boring. Kill them already." We ran outside. The hangar stood in an industrial area, surrounded by abandoned workshops. A siren wailed in the distance. The police. I turned around. "No," Morgan grabbed my sleeve. "It's an alarm system. They broke down the gate." We ran along the fence. There were shouts from behind. A bullet whizzed over his head, crashing into a brick. Construction site. Morgan pointed at the dilapidated building. "You can get lost there." It smelled of mold and urine. We made our way through the rubble, hearing footsteps behind us. On the second floor, Morgan stopped, pulling a pistol from its holster. "Only 2 rounds. Save money." They caught up with us at the collapsed staircase. Trio. Everyone is wearing masks. "The teacher will be pleased," one growled, lifting the rebar. Shot. The bullet knocked down the first one. The second one rushed at me. I grabbed the pipe and hit it. The bone cracked. The third man aimed a pistol at Morgan, but she fired first. Silence. Only our heavy sighs disturbed it. Here, Morgan picked up a key fob with the words "Lesson Garden" engraved on it from the floor. We reached her car, hidden behind a hill. The navigator showed a patch of forest 50 kilometers away. Garden is a red dot on the map. I lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "No, if it's what I think it is, it should disappear forever." She stepped on the gas. I looked in the mirror, expecting to see a black raincoat. But there was only a dusty road running off into the darkness. We drove into the forest on a blurred dirt road, branches hitting the windshield like the hands of the dead, clinging to life. The lesson garden turned out to be an abandoned nursery, rows of cages with rotten signs, dangerous plants, and behind them, a bunker hidden under a layer of earth. The door was open. It smelled of bleach and copper inside. Morgan went first, gun at the ready. The corridor led us to a hall with screens on the walls. They contain recordings of torture, kidnappings, screams mixed with hoarse instructions. "Break your little fingers first. Don't let them sleep for 6 days." In the center of the room was a table with a hard drive flashing red. "Archive. This should be burned," I whispered, but Morgan was already pulling the trigger. The shot crashed the server. Sparks fell to the floor. There was a burst of applause from the darkness behind him. He came out from behind the column, tall, in an oiled jumpsuit, his face hidden by a balaclava. In his hands was an axe, the one with the jagged blade. "Detective Morgan. And the mouse. You ruined my classroom." The voice was calm, almost paternal. "Arnold Grace was your rat, wasn't he?" Morgan didn't lower the gun. "He took on your crimes while you were raising more bastards." He laughed. "Arnie was a good student, but too loud. Just like you." She fired. The bullet pierced his shoulder, but he didn't even flinch. The axe swung in the air. I ran to the side, and Morgan jumped in the opposite direction. The blade sank into the floor between us. He moved toward her, pulling a knife from his belt. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from a wall and hit him on the back. The balloon bounced off with a clang, and he spun around, pinning me against the wall. The face is a centimeter away from mine. The balaclava had slipped off, revealing the scars, the same ones, the glued together eye, the burns. "You." I exhaled. "New guy," he grinned. But the lessons are over. Shot. His head jerked, and a dark spot filled his balaclava. Morgan stood there with a shaking pistol. "Last round," she said as the body collapsed to the floor. We poured gasoline over the bunker from the cans we found in the corner. The flames engulfed the screens, the recordings, the corpse. On the way out, Morgan suddenly stopped. He's not a teacher. What? That voice from the tapes. He was older. This one is just a security guard. The explosion threw us to the ground. The bunker collapsed, burying all the evidence. Now, a year later, I'm living in a trailer, having changed my name. Morgan was gone. The news is talking about a series of arson attacks on schools across the state. A toy hatchet and a note are found each place. The lesson continues. Sometimes at night, I hear metal grinding, but it's just the wind. Or not.